Welcome to another How to Succeed podcast. I'm your host, Mike Montague, and this is How to Succeed at Creating a Better Buyer Experience. The following podcast is copyrighted by Sandler Systems, LLC, and protected by U.S. copyright laws. Sandler is the worldwide leader in sales, management, and customer service training. Find more information at sandler.com. My guest this week is Jonathon Blackburn. He is VP of Sales at Quiller. That's spelled Quiller. You can find them at Quiller.com. It's a deal collaboration tool, and we're going to find out more about how it and him can help you create a better buying experience. Jonathon, welcome to the podcast. Let's start with the better buying experience first. Before we dive into Quiller, talk about what maybe is important. What are some of the common misconceptions? Why the buying experience is important in the first place?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mike, and thank you for the intro. Would it be okay if I gave you a little bit of context, I guess, before I jumped into that one?
Yeah, you bet.
Cool. I'll kind of go back, not too far back, a couple of years. But I started to notice, I think, a shift before COVID that I think especially kind of accelerated during the COVID, pandemic, and even it's coming out of it, if you can say that. And that a lot of the ways, the tools, the techniques, the trainings, the things we were doing as sellers, I'll say specifically in like the SaaS kind of tech community, but really just the sellers in general, had started to become a little bit, I'll say, outdated as we kind of like moved to a little bit more of a virtual buying experience. And then you fast forward with the pandemic and really everyone kind of going remote, at least for a short period of time. I think really importantly, along with that, buyers going remote too. It's one thing to be a seller selling in a remote environment, but it's a little bit different. And I think some ways a little bit tougher to be a buyer trying to buy something in a remote environment. And there's lots of studies and stuff out there that I won't bore you with, but basically the kind of TLDR on them is there's a lot of people that are involved in a buying process and cycle these days, more so than ever. And when you add the complexity of being virtual to that and people not just being able to have conversations in an office, after a meeting, in a conference room, it gets a little bit tougher. And so I kind of noticed a shift, especially through COVID, in that it was a little bit harder for us to sell, for salespeople to sell, much harder for buyers to buy. And because of that, I think there was kind of a widening gap in what I'll call the buyer, the sales experience. And so that's kind of, I mean, obviously what Quiller does, but kind of getting into what that actually looks like, which I'm happy to. The kind of the goal of creating a better buying experience is, quite frankly, to make it easier for people to buy.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's the goal of all the salespeople and sales leaders. So that was, an easy softball to get started there. Another thing we should say up front is you do have a lot of experience with Sandler's training. So full disclosure, that works. I also created a course with HubSpot where we were talking about the hybrid environment during the pandemic. And I found the same thing, that I think pre-pandemic, people were really struggling with, maybe we'll use an online tool or something when it makes sense, or when we don't have any other option as something to collaborate on or something, And then the pandemic really was that we don't have any other options. We're going to have to figure this out. And so if you're using a CRM, there isn't a really great way to collaborate on a document or to have a repository for your clients of all the stuff you talked about. You end up attaching a whole bunch of stuff to an email, or you're including meeting recordings and links, and then those get shared to other people, and it gets a little bit messy. And I think that's really where Quiller comes in, as a way to organize all of those client communications in a way that they can find it. You can work together, you can co-build a repository of resources here to help move deals forward, especially in the complex ones, right? If it's a one-call close, okay, sure, you can send them the PDF over or whatever. But if you got an enterprise sale and a lot of moving parts and a lot of people on the buying team, that can get really messy, and somebody never saved the PDF, or they didn't get CC'd on the right email, and all of a sudden all the stuff's gone and messed up. Is that right?
Yeah, basically, yeah. I think that's a really good kind of synopsis or summary. I think the kind of like the punchline here is that my experience, and after having done this a while and worked with and for quite a bit of SaaS and tech companies as a sales rep and a sales leader, I can tell you firsthand that selling remotely and being good at selling remotely and building a remote sales process isn't just buying Zoom licenses and hopping on Zoom calls like that. Selling on Zoom is not selling remotely, or at least creating a good virtual buying experience. And so there's really, I think, two sides of the coin there. The first is how can you support your sellers in this environment? A big part of that is process. As you mentioned, Sandler trained, have gone through it quite a couple of times and brought it to different companies. For what it's worth, also been trained in a lot of other sales methodologies, but I myself continue to come back to Sandler for a variety of reasons. I think having a good sales process, a good sales motion, a playbook, for lack of a better phrase, which I know is kind of a hot topic right now, I think is really important. On top of that, though, I think there's an extra layer, which is making sure that you're providing your team with the tools to be successful in that environment. So it's how you share information, it's what that information looks like, it's how the buyer is engaging with it, and it's also what you can gather or glean from how prospects are engaging with your content. Who's looking at it, who's doing what are they looking at, what are they interacting with? And the flip side to that is the buyer experience, which I think is, quite frankly, one of, if not maybe the most important part of creating a good virtual sales experience, which is how are you making it easy for prospects and potential buyers to engage with your content, to not have that like endless email thread shuffle where things get lost, to give them something that they can share internally. Because like I mentioned, no one makes a buying decision in a vacuum. That's a good representation of the company, the sales rep. But again, going back to the most important part, it's a good representation of the buyer and the prospective buyer on there. It makes them look good. It summarizes the information. It gets them, more often than not, what they want, which is to work with you.
Yeah, to me, it makes a ton of sense. And again, I think I kind of go back to the common mistakes here are moving too fast in your sales process, forgetting that the world has changed, throwing some content or information over the wall because the buyer asked for it, and not really having a plan to organize it, make it look good, have it be your best or modern stuff. I think if you're a sales leader listening to this, how many times do you recreate a document that somebody else did, or your people are shuffling PowerPoints around and they either just don't look right, or they don't get communicated right, or on the other side, they don't get received or shared with the right people and found when they need to be found. There's a lot of complicated moving parts to this, but I think if you take the attitude that you're presenting there, that we can create a smooth buyer experience, there are modern tools that can help us move through this sales process quickly, we can make the most of the advantages of selling remotely and hybrid. And I would say even in person, if you're happening to be doing that in complicated sales, you still need this tech behind you to follow up on those in-person meetings and things. But let's transition a little bit to behavior here and doing the right thing at the right time, because I feel like in what you do, especially that deal collaboration stuff, and in the middle, you're in the battle zone, I guess, as we'd call it, right? It's not the prospecting, it's not the opening up, it's not really the closing and we got the deal signed and we're in customer success. But this is when we're in the middle of a hot lead. That's when we don't want to mess this up, right? We don't want to give them a reason to not buy from us. So what are some of the key behaviors that you think salespeople need to do when they're trying to, create a positive buying experience?
Yeah, great question. I think one of the most important ones is just having a very clear structure to the conversation, to the call. I think making sure that the seller and the buyer are on the same page, the prospect and the sales rep are on the same page in terms of what are our expectations for the call, right? No mutual mystification. What do we want to make sure we learn, take away from the call, and also just having the mindset of wanting to understand and learn more. Now, of course, you can't, just really walk into a conversation and say, "Hey, I want to learn all about you." I mean, I guess you could, which would probably be better than what some people might be doing. It's important to come into a conversation with perspective, to have a clear outline and agenda, to make sure we understand what the prospect wants to accomplish, and to ask good, meaningful questions that are going to help drive the conversation to some version of a yes or a no as quickly as possible. I mean, I can kind of get into some of like the pain funnel stuff and other Sandler methodologies that I'm a very big fan of, but I think really it's just having a clear outline for the call, and making sure that you're asking the right questions to understand the problem that the buyer might have and how you can help or not.
Yeah, I think to take that deeper, we have Sandler trainers on here that can explain all the Sandler processes and stuff. Really kind of what I'm interested from your perspective as a VP of sales, and especially somebody in sales enablement trying to help people, sell more and sell more easily, is how do those Sandler principles apply when they're in like a first call or a second call? And I kind of feel like Quiller is really about the follow-up and moving from one call to another, which becomes really difficult. And there's a lot of, Sandler tools, like you mentioned, upfront contracts and what we're going to do and setting agendas and discovery. But I'm wondering how you kind of combine all of these, the technology and the sales methodology stuff, into an experience that is best for the buyers.
Yeah, fair question. And so I think a big part of this, like I mentioned before, is having a process. That being said, people don't always follow the process. People don't always follow the game plan. They don't always do what they're supposed to do or what you want them to do. And so I think that's where having a really, a tool like Quiller comes into play. I think as sales reps, we've probably all been there, where you have the initial discovery call or the intro call, whatever you want to call it. You ask some good questions, understand what the prospect wants to accomplish, share a little bit about your company, what they do. And it's kind of easy for the most part to move to a demo after that, which is, pretty standard kind of process, discovery call, demo. What tends to happen is when people fall off or there's gaps in the process or where things tend to get like slowed down is what happens after that demo. There isn't always like a very clear next step. A lot of times people are willing to talk to a salesperson and they want to talk to them because they want to see what you do, what you can offer, how you can help them. And then you have that conversation. And then what happens after the demo? I think deals are typically kind of won or lost in the hours and days and weeks after your initial demo, the Zoom calls, all that kind of stuff. And as salespeople, we're never in the room when people are making buying decisions. We're really just not. And so we can ask questions, you can have a good process, a good plan. We can do everything we can to put the right steps in place to try to progress conversations. But the reality is people don't always do what we want them to do. Sometimes we're right, sometimes we're wrong. Sometimes the process doesn't align to how the buyer wants to buy. And we're not in the room when they make those kind of buying decisions. And so having something that can potentially sell for you, but I think just as important, having something that can help you extend the value proposition, the value of what you have to offer throughout that sales cycle really kind of tends to expedite it. Something that we've seen is, around a 24 to 25% reduction in sales cycle, which kind of just goes back to making sure that people have the right information at the right time. So having a clear process is really important, but then also having a tech stack or a tool to be able to help you progress those conversations if someone doesn't follow the process, or if for whatever reason things tend to get complicated or lost in the shuffle.
I love that. I think that's really great and kind of locks up those behaviors of doing the follow-up and having a plan to organize it. I think, we've hit that several times, but most people are just winging it and not doing any sort of follow-up. Or, I think the stats are like most salespeople follow up 1.5 tries. Like they'll send an immediate recap and then maybe half of the people will try another thing after that, but they don't really have a communication plan or a process to go through this. So I love that part of it. And I think that takes us to technique here a little bit, which is, what do you actually put in it? And I'm thinking, Quiller maybe specifically, but in general, we've kind of already mentioned the meeting recordings, documents and stuff. What would a really good communication plan or resource area look like?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, and I will put a caveat out there where it's not a great answer, but I'll say it depends. It depends on the prospect. It depends on the tool you're selling, the buying cycle, the process, all that kind of stuff. Very important. Obviously, what you're going to put in a follow-up, whether that be through Quiller or any tool or just an email, or in a follow-up process for a $10,000 deal that takes 2 weeks to close versus a $200,000 deal that takes 6 months to close, completely different because the buying cycles and processes are different. I think the most important thing from my experience and perspective, though, is to have a really clear understanding of how you can help, and to make sure that the prospect clearly understands the value you provide in relation to what their gap is, what they're trying to achieve, what their ideal state or pain is. However, you're kind of phrasing your sales terminology or sales process there. I think that's really important. Also, things like the Zoom recording, all that kind of stuff is important, but a good follow-up process should really follow your sales process, meaning you build along with it as you continue to have conversations, continue to add to it. After the initial call, you're probably going to share something around like, hey, this is what we talked about. This is how I think we might be able to help. This is the value that we might be able to provide. These are some of the stats, case studies, things that I mentioned. Here's the Zoom call. But as you have those kind of follow-up and subsequent conversations, I think that should be built out along with the sales cycle. So it's, hey, what does the implementation process look like? What does the timeline look like? What does a contract security documentation look like? How can I help you sell this internally in terms of what can I provide, share? What is the team going to be interested in seeing? And how do I make you look good? And then I think you can follow that all the way down the process to pricing. And then having a very clear, concise, and easy way to share pricing with the prospect to the point where if they so choose, they can actually press a button and purchase to that same page.
I love that. I mean, I think it's a simple but overlooked move, which I can tell, you've done your Sandler training, is just ask them, what do they want to see? What would make them look good? I love that one. And, what type of information would be helpful to share with other teams? If you're asking them, most people will tell you. When I think about hybrid selling or virtual selling, I think one of the big ones is, what format do you want that in, and how would you like it delivered? Because sometimes you're communicating over text message or a Slack message or LinkedIn or email or a phone conversation or a Zoom call. There's so many options that I think once we leave this, okay, Zoom was the best option for all of us to get in and have a conversation. Going forward, do we need a Zoom call every week, or do you want me to just email you this stuff? Or, I think making those kind of decisions is really tough for salespeople these days. And a lot of times it just comes down to asking the buyer what they prefer. Any other tips, tricks, hacks, or tools or techniques come to mind for creating a better buying experience?
I think this is something that really goes overlooked a lot, and it probably seems, or maybe it should be obvious, but you really want to make sure that I think through any sales process, what a prospect is really kind of going through, at least if I put my own kind of sales, buyer hat on here, when I buy stuff is, do I feel like this person or this company is going to be easy to work with? Am I going to enjoy working with them? And a big part of that happens in the sales process, right? Like how you engage with the sales rep, the sales team, the buyer kind of buying experience. But really, as you kind of start to get to the end, especially if you're weighing different options, you have a couple of different quotes, different competitors, and you're looking to make that decision, time and time again, I come back to and I hear from our buyers, the reason they choose us, but the reason I also choose certain companies to work with too, is because they make it easier to buy from it. And that's in a variety of ways. Sometimes it's the process, sometimes it's the salesperson, sometimes it's just the feeling we get as a buyer that they really understand and can support me. And there's a real visual aspect to that, which I don't think it's talked a lot because, after all, we're salespeople. We're not graphic designers. We're not in marketing. We're not in some of these things. And as salespeople, I think, sometimes we want to take a lot of what we do into our own hands. We don't want to have to rely on other teams or departments or people to help us do things. But there's a real sense of, if I'm looking at two different companies, which one is easier to buy from? Yes, but also which one do I feel like is more professional? Which one stands out more to me, not just in their process, but what they're sending me, what it looks like, the look and feel, the experience that I get from this. So I don't talk about it too much, but I feel like given the conversation we're having, it's an important thing to talk about, which is you can do everything right and sometimes still fall short for a variety of reasons. And putting something together that's a great representation and visually appealing part of the process sometimes can be the difference between winning or losing a deal.
I think that's huge. And it's a great point to land on, because I know it is for me personally. I've struggled with this because even here at Sandler, we're a large international organization. But when people interact with our technology or our systems and social media, they expect it to be the size of a large international company. Like, Amazon and Google and Apple are all training, our clients and buyers of what technology should look like. So if you put together a Word document with, Comic Sans on it or something, they're not going to see that as professional and delivered in a way that they would expect, especially in large deals. Like you mentioned, if it's a small business or whatever, and you're working with a local, designer or something, maybe that's different. But if you're spending tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars on a thing, you want to know that they spent some effort and that they're delivering things in a professional way. And that just adds to the credibility and trust. You start questioning their credibility or trust when things don't look professional. I think that's the big thing. It's not really that it puts you ahead, it's that it's something that could definitely drop you behind if they're questioning that trust. So I wanted to get to know you a little bit better, Jonathon, here before we wrap up. 3 quick questions about you and your career. Once again, you can find Quiller at QWILR for Quiller, Quiller.com. The link is in the notes below as well. How do you define success at this point in your career?
Yeah, that's a tough question. It's a big question. But I think for me, it really just comes down to, and maybe this isn't kind of a standard definition of success, but maybe just success more for myself after having been doing this for a little while. I won't give the actual number, but for a little while, having a family, having children a couple of years ago, I think my time has become even more valuable, and something that I really looked at in terms of defining success is making sure that I'll say in the context of me, but making sure that I'm enjoying what I'm doing and who I'm doing it with. I think if I can check both of those boxes, to me, that is success in a variety of ways. And I don't want to get too kind of deep in meta here, but I think to me, that's kind of my definition of success.
Yeah, we can talk about that after the call, but I'm right with you. I feel like it's, I'm not going to call you this, but for me, like a middle-aged thing. Like once you kind of feel like you've done something, you've climbed the ladder a little bit, then you start looking around and you go, you know what? I want to do this with fun people too. I want to enjoy what I'm doing. And I'm glad that more young people are realizing that from the beginning too, that just taking any job is a great way to maybe cover your bases, but not a long-term sustainable, option for you. So I'm interested about the opposite then. What was the biggest hurdle or lesson learned that you had to get over in your career in order to be successful?
Yeah, I'll kind of keep to the first person here, is kind of getting out of my own way. I think there's this concept of, you know what you should be doing, but actually doing what you should be doing or taking your own advice, I guess, is sometimes the hardest thing to do. Knowing what to do and actually doing it are two different things. And especially earlier on, but maybe kind of in the middle of my career to date, my career to date, I'll say, taking opportunities, roles, things because I felt like it was going to give me the W-2 or the title or like kind of some of these external check marks or satisfaction. I think I did that enough, and I never really got what I was hoping to get out of that. And it wasn't until I was able to step out of my own way and really take a meaningful kind of introspective look in terms of like, what does make me happy? What do I want to do? Where would I like to spend my time? That I was able to kind of, come to my quote unquote senses around that and start spending my time, but also being a part of companies, places, things. And this is just aside from work, but even extracurricular and stuff I do as part of the community outside of work, and things that add joy and meaning to my life, and not just doing it for an external kind of check mark or an external kind of vote of satisfaction.
Yeah, I second that one as well. So, since you're a Sandler student, I wanted to give you a shot to talk about that a little bit too. Do you have a favorite Sandler concept or rule that you still, hang on to and used to try and remember?
I have a favorite rule and favorite concepts. Maybe I'm breaking the rules and going with two here.
Go for it.
So forgive me if I am, Mike. Big fan of what Sandler calls upfront contracts, which really just kind of setting an agenda for the conversation with a clear outcome. With regards to kind of Sandler rule or principle, what I tend to live by most aspects of my life, if not every aspect, is you can't get mad at someone for not following the rules if you don't tell them what they are. I think this applies in a professional setting, whether you're in sales, whether you're working with colleagues internally. It also applies in a non-professional setting, i.e. when I'm talking to my 3-year-old, or in any other aspect of my life. I find that tends to work pretty well.
Yeah, I think they go together enough. We'll count that as one. Upfront contracts expectations are the way to avoid that mutual mystification and people doing things that you didn't tell them they couldn't do. Great rule. I appreciate you joining us on the podcast. Again, that's Jonathon Blackburn from Quiller. The website is in the link below. Check that out if you're looking for some sort of deal collaboration tool or creating a better buying experience for your clients. If you need more information on Sandler and what we do with sales methodology, go check out our free resources at Sandler.com. As always, you can share this podcast with somebody that you think needs to hear it, or subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. Thank you for listening. And remember, whatever you are, be a good one. The How to Succeed podcast is brought to you by Sandler, the worldwide leader in sales, management, and customer service training with over 200 locations. For more information, visit Sandler.com. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to click subscribe to get notified about future sales and leadership videos from Sandler.
The Sandler Summit returns in 2023. Each new event builds exponentially upon the energy and success of the prior year. The 2022 Sandler Summit event was a huge success for everyone who attended, so don't miss the next one. Buy your tickets to the Sandler Summit at Sandler.com/summit.